What's going on?
I can feel the blood creeping up from the heathens. Got will, got fight, got pride, got reason. If they wanna go eat, then you know I'm gon' feed them. If you're coming for me, hope you're ready for a demon. I got eyes in the back of my head, I'm seeing. Take me for granted and you know I'm leaving. I'ma take what's mine with the webs I'm weaving. I could take this crowd from seeing to believing. Got a taste for blood and my tongue keeps bleeding. From the words I spit, so sharp, so freezing. So cold, behold, frostbite they feeling. I could tear you apart or I could go heal them. Don't believe in fate, don't believe in ceilings. I just need a taste and my mind starts feeling. I don't pace myself, I grind on kneeling. Got lust for change, I just love the feeling. I ain't gonna give up. Got too little time, I'ma live up. Head down, push forward through the tough times. Cause anything worth doing is a tough climb. I ain't gonna give up. Got too little time, I'ma live up. Head down, push forward through the tough times. Cause anything worth doing is a tough climb. Cause I'ma live life for the fight, yeah, I'm here to get it. I got drive, got sight, always have a vision. I go by at night, I be in my feelings. I'ma be fine, need time, and I'll soon be winning. I live life for the fight, yeah, I'm here to get it. I got drive, got sight, always have a vision. I go by at night, I be in my feelings. I'ma be fine, need time, and I'll soon be winning. I can feel the blood creeping up from the heathens. Got will, got fight, got pride, got reason. If they wanna go eat, then you know I'm gon' feed them. If you're coming for me, hope you're ready for a demon. I can feel the blood creeping up from the heathens. Got will, got fight, got pride, got reason. If you wanna go eat, then you know I'm gon' feed them. If you're coming for me, hope you're ready for a demon.
Hello.
We're back. It's been so long, I'm not sure how to do this anymore.
That's like riding a bike. You'll get right back on it. Hello, everybody. Welcome.
Good evening, everybody, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Dead Air Sunday Night Live Show with myself, George Lopez, and Ken DaCosta. And where's our names? How come our names aren't up there? We got Cody in the background is going to be helping us with some of the technical stuff because right now, there we go. Because right now we are using a new platform. And should we divulge the name of the platform, Ken? Because the minute we do, everybody's going to steal it.
Give them a shout. They deserve it. God knows we've had to spend so much time learning it. So
Yeah, shout out to our new platform that we use instead of StreamYard. It is called Evie Mux, and it's miles above what we were doing before. And the big one, I know Ken's mentioned it on the Monday Night Town Hall for our Patreon members, up to 12 people on screen at a time, as opposed to the 10 that we had before. We can now go to 12.
it's a melee.
So I want to fill that up. I want everybody joining us on this town hall. And tomorrow night be the first one I'll be joining too. I missed a couple of them. As you are all aware of, the computer saga, it continues. We had to do a couple of tests today. I'm on my I don't know, 10, 12, 14-year-old laptop, and it's working fine. I plugged in the external Logitech camera, the external microphone. So it's so far so good. Fingers crossed as we go through tonight's show. Topic tonight: Chris Rondina is going to be joining us. Good friend, returner, and world traveler, and we're going to get into that here in just a little bit. Before we get to that, there is some laundry to air out. And before I get to that, guys, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Also, the reminder bell for upcoming content, and also hit that like button. Very important, again, for what we do algorithm wise. It, again, really promotes things. So make sure you guys do hit that. But there's a tragedy in the field, Ken, that you've been somewhat vocal about on social media, but I think it's something that we both should address, but I'll let you go first, sir.
Well, sure. I mean, first of all, um, our sincerest thoughts go out to the family of Dan Rivera. As I would imagine most of you know, we lost Dan just a matter of days ago um, during his tour in Gettysburg. So, our sincere thoughts, our love, and prayers and support go to Sarah and his four boys. Um, there has been a lot said about this particular case, and my thoughts, if you want to go to the Rise Up Paranormal page on Facebook, I have a post on there in which that I address this. The thing I think that I echo a lot of other people are starting to confuse correlation and causation between something because, as we all know, he was on tour with the Annabelle doll doing events. And there's a faction of people in the field who want to squarely place the blame, if you will, on this object. And I don't think anything can be more unfeeling than to somehow lead with that and make that the focus of attention rather than the idea that a husband and father was lost. Um, we've had Dan on one of our shows. I've worked with him in the past on an investigation, spoken to him other times. And as I mentioned in my post, I'm not going to make it out like, we're close personal friends. We're friendly acquaintances. So I know him in that regard. But um, there are things being said. There is the FAFO crowd, which I'm just going to say, stands for fuck around and find out, that believe that the root of the cause of this tragic event was, in fact, proximity to this. And then you get the other people who say, well, that's not the real Annabelle doll because they think the one in the movie is the actual one. So misinformation, confusion, and this is why I always say paranormal is a wonderful thing to be involved in. Don't obsess by it. And again, I'll just finish with don't confuse correlation with causation. And there's another word, and we're going to use this with our guest tonight. It's something called apophenia, and it's something we deal a lot with in the paranormal field, where two things seemingly unrelated, a line is drawn through them, connecting them, where one has nothing to do with the other, but somehow we make it that way. And there's an awful lot of apophenia going on surrounding us right now. So I would just say there are many more people in the field and even casual observers who believe that we should lift people at their worst times rather than sensationalize it for views and so forth. So I don't want to make that into too much of a negative thing because we want to celebrate their life, not contribute to the negativity, but those are just my feelings on it. And I know that we can do a lot better and we should do better.
Yeah, I agree, Ken. I just, the absurdity of it at this point in time is, you know, so aggravating, so frustrating that, and, I think it's a 50-50 out there. There are those who are truly believing that there is an Annabelle connection to this catastrophe, that they are completely sold by it, bought into it, whatever, letting their imagination run wild with them. And then there are opportunists. And we've talked about that ad nauseum on this show about people that will look for anything that will get them clickbait, their likes, whatever it may be. And, those can just burn in hell. And not having a shred of empathy for this family, for his children, for his wife, for his dear friends, and just running rampant to see, let me put this particular uh, thumbnail up, let me put this title up, and it'll draw the audience in. And the sad part about it is it works. Um, so, you know, as far as I'm concerned, they can go to hell. I just have no interest in them. The unfortunate part of it is that, again, this particular iconic doll is being shown in different states. What's next? Car tragedy, 3 people die, must be Annabelle. Bank was robbed, must be Annabelle. It just anything and everything that people, there's no accountability. There's no accountability. And so instead of saying, well, people just suck, it's got to be this wicked doll that's traveling through our township this weekend, and what's causing it all. And again, I there's so much more I could say on it, but I don't want to become, you know, that kind of person who is just feeding into the frenzy with them just as much. All I can say is that they're not worth our time. And please, if anybody out there sees those people posting on their whatever platform as a content creator, ignore them. Don't even give them a view or anything whatsoever, because that's what they're hoping for. And it's a damn shame.
Yeah. Hold them in your hearts.
Yes.
And that's true. I mean, there are people in this field who pass every day, but this is a high profile individual because of his association with the Warrens, who are also, being thrown into that mix too. Um,
Mark and Debbie Constantino.
yeah. I
Same.
mean, there's so many that, again, we're going to talk about apophenia, if that's not a term you've heard before. We deal with it a lot in the paranormal. You know how that is. The psychic says you're going to have car trouble. 8 months later, you get a flat, and it's like, oh, the psychic was right. So it's just connecting things that may have really no correlation to each other.
Well, I don't know too much about that, Ken, because right back here, I've got the angel doll. This came from Waverly Hills Sanatorium. And lately, I've had this constant itch in the nether regions, and I'm thinking this is the cause behind it.
Things of PIA.
It is just an annoyance. So now I'm going to blame everything on this.
Yeah, do it. Go.
It just seems much easier than going to the doctor. But that's
Healthcare
all I
costs.
had for that there.
Instead of, go see your shaman about
Yeah.
that.
But yeah, just real quick, as people were mentioning it in the chat here too, which I can't get into, Cody. I don't know why. Still trying to figure it out. There's only a search bar in there, but there's
Yeah,
nothing
yeah.
to add to comments. Uh,
Yeah,
I
as
am,
mentioned, Cody is in chat. You make sure you give him a shout out there. He's
yeah. Cody's in chat. Cody's also behind the scenes as a producer tonight, because I again am on my laptop and I'm not setting up EV Mux on my laptop. I'm waiting to get a new desktop.
even
So I'm actually in the guest spot, such as our guest tonight, Chris Rondina, is. So I don't have control of anything other than what I say. So the only thing I could say otherwise with regards to the computer, if I don't have a positive outlook by the end of this business week, I will divulge to you all some discoveries while interacting with the computer manufacturer I'm interacting with now. But for the time being, I'll just cross my fingers and hope that they get everything taken care of during this week. Shouldn't take more than that.
it'll all be fine.
Yeah. Let's bring our guest on, Ken.
Yeah, let's do that. And by the way, that's EV Musk, not Elon Musk. Okay, just for those of you
Bucks, yeah.
keeping score at home. All right, we have a dear friend whom I've known for years, and George is known for years, and he hosted a very popular show here on Dead Air. Monday Night Monsters.
Monsters.
Monsters. But his name is Christopher Rondina, and he is a nationally recognized author, storyteller, and folklorist, best known for his work exploring haunted history, regional legends, and the darker side of New England folklore. With a career spanning well over 2 decades, Rondina has built a reputation as one of America's premier legend hunters, combining meticulous historical research with a flair for immersive storytelling. At the heart of Christopher's work is a belief that legends, whether rooted in fact or folklore, hold a mirror to our cultural fears, desires, and forgotten past. So it is with great pleasure we welcome back to Dead Air Christopher Rondina.
Well,
Hey.
hello, gentlemen. How are you?
We're doing well.
You know I loves me some monsters.
He loves monsters.
Monsters are what I do.
Well, we're going to cover a lot of that. We're going to cover an awful lot of things, including your latest works, your upcoming works, your past works, and some of your world travels, as George alluded to. And we're going to get into the whole idea of folklore and monsters and legends and the paranormal. So sit tight, everybody. It's going to be a cool next 2 hours here.
Hi, Mary Beth. Nice to see you.
Melissa's in Kansas City. Jonathan is in Rhode Island. Where's Brendan? We want our Australian pal in here. Where's Brendan?
If you're in Kansas City, go ahead and ship me some barbecue. I can always use some good barbecue.
Well, hell, I wouldn't blame him.
Well, what we'll do, Ken, as we always do on each of the shows, is I go behind stage and give you some time with our guest, and then pass it over to me. At that point in time, we'll take it to the break.
All right. You got a little freeze up on your end, George, so I'll give you time to work that out. But thank you very much. Um, all right. Well, I'm not frozen, and Christopher doesn't look frozen.
Don't think I'm
So
frozen.
let us continue. Okay, so let's get around to it. You've worked with our group on various occasions, and we always look to you as a very pragmatic person with a bit of, a skeptical point of view. You're not a skeptic per se, skeptical.
I'm a skeptical believer. That's what I like to say.
Yeah, I mean, there's two different things. But you came to this, but you also, and people may or may not be aware of this, but you had a profound experience as a youngin that I want to first of all tell us about that experience, and then to ask you how much that informed you as you went forward as an author and an interest in the paranormal, the supernatural, and so forth.
It was very much a defining moment in my life. It kind of charted the course that I would be on, that I'm on till this day. So what I'm presuming you're referring to is that when I was about 15 years old, I
Mhm.
lived in a beautiful house that was about at that time about 80 years old, but is more than a century old now because I'm an old man. But I'm in Newport, Rhode Island, beautiful Victorian, and we'd been living there for probably 6 or 8 months, and I encountered what I can only describe as a ghost. The first time I'd ever had any kind of an experience like that, and this entity, this figure that appeared in my room in the presence of both myself and my good friend Russell at the time, who was staying over. I, being very curious about it, this sort of column of sort of heavy air that we could see, approached it and touched it. And in doing so, ended up collapsing to the floor, sobbing like a baby, absolutely filled with sorrow that was not from me. And so you can call it possession if you want. I'm not sure if that's really the accurate term for it, but in a way, it was much like being possessed. And I experienced this being's sorrow throughout my entire body, so much that I was clenched in a ball on the floor. And this went on for several minutes. Occasionally, it would sort of relax and release me, but every time I attempted to get up or relaxed myself, it would clench back down on me. And once several rounds of that had gone through, and I was thoroughly terrified, it finally stopped. And then I could hear a voice, coming from behind where I was, and it had apparently moved on to my friend Russell and was now actually speaking through him. And it said just several phrases repeated over and over again. Phrases included, I never meant to hurt you. I didn't want to hurt anybody. You wouldn't let me go. You wouldn't let me grow up. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you. And when I heard him saying these things, at first I thought that he was suggesting that he had somehow done this to me. And then it occurred to me that this clearly was not him talking, and that whatever had sort of tried to find an outlet through me found I was experiencing its emotions. He was able to sort of verbally express whatever it was feeling. And once it all passed, after who knows how many minutes this took, as you can imagine, my friend Russell and I were absolutely terrified. We ended up leaving the house, walking around town for several hours before we were even brave enough to come back to the house. But yes, that absolutely changed my outlook on life. And I was only 15 years old at the time. So, for what it's worth, this was the mid 80s. There was no internet. No one was going to give a 15-year-old death records or house records or anything like this. And I wouldn't even know where to start. So, one of the first questions I invariably get is, did you ever investigate it? Did you find out about it? And back then in the mid 80s, no, I certainly didn't do anything of the kind. And it was decades later, as a wonderful sort of side effect of being involved with Rise Up Paranormal and your group, that your historian Chris Blanchett was able to do some research on the house for me, and we ended up discovering that an 11-year-old girl, the only daughter of the owners of the house, had actually died there in about 1890, give or take. I apologize, I don't remember the number of the date off the top of my head, but it was in the early 1890s, and that almost certainly this was who I encountered. There are other reasons why I believe that, but a little bit more research later, I was able to find her cause of death, actually locate her grave and everything, and that was a huge closure for me, but it was also a real validation of what I experienced.
Yeah.
So it was a big, very big defining moment.
Yeah, I think a lot of people immediately start to gravitate toward a possession. But that's not necessarily the case. There are things like walk ins um, that don't necessarily mean someone is taken over and possessed. I want to ask you a question before we move on. I want to ask you a question about Russell. Um, do you think, in looking back on this, that he had some type of mediumship abilities or the ability to channel? I don't know if if you guys stay in touch, because those things happen to friends as time goes on. But it's just a thought in my mind that why he was, I don't want to say vulnerable, but why he was so open to these things. And the second part of that, two questions for the price of one: did he have a memory of it afterwards?
So this is interesting. So I remembered everything in the aftermath. Russell did not remember speaking. And so, for what it's worth, it was a very complicated situation for both of us after that. He was truly freaked out because he remembered what happened to me. He remembered seeing it, but he didn't remember what had happened when it used him as a conduit. That's the word I like to use, as conduit, rather than possession, because I think that her name was Mary Stevens Almy. At least that's fair. I'm fairly certain that that's who it was. This young girl who had died, just needed to talk. She needed to get out her story, and that was what she was looking to do. So Russell and I ended up falling out in the aftermath of that, and didn't talk for many, many years. But we are in touch today, to this day, and so it's very fortunate for me that I'm able to talk to him. We have discussed it. It still makes him uncomfortable, but he remembers what happened. I'm not sure how much he believes. Decades later, sort of believes that it wasn't, youthful fancy. But again, everybody deals with these things very differently. But to the question of compatibility. I've always believed that anything spectral of that kind is not unlike software. Certain things will run on a Mac and certain things will run on a PC. And if you try to put, software from one into the other, it either won't work properly or it will be unpredictable. And I think that whatever my emotional makeup was, that it was able to sort of express that raw emotion, that sorrow, through me. I am a very, very emotional person. I am at least somewhat empathic, although I don't really buy into, like, the telepathic empath thing. That's not something that I have any sense of. But I am a very empathic person in general. So I feel like it somehow was able to reach my emotional core, but finding that insufficient, it took Russell's intellect, and that might explain why he doesn't remember it, because that was a more intellectual aspect of it. If it was actually using him to speak, then it was connecting with a different part of who he was. So that could explain why he doesn't really remember it, and didn't remember it even moments later.
Yeah. Well, my friend Christopher is a very empathic, caring, and generous person.
Hey, I cry at car commercials. That's how much
Yeah.
of a
So
wuss I am. So
I am going to get you to cry tonight if it's the last thing I do.
it's not impossible, I'll tell you that.
All right, let's move on. So you're interested in this thing. Was there a particular legend or ghost story as a young man that really kind of turned you toward this? I know you're a big devotee of comics and ghost stories and all of those things, but was there one particular story that stuck with you, that that light bulb went on and said, hey, I might want to pursue this more?
So I'd have to say that, first of all, I grew up absolutely loving ghost stories, monsters, and things like that, which primed me in a lot of ways for the path I'd eventually take. But had never experienced anything until that one encounter in Newport, when I was 15. But it wasn't that. It was years later. Um, People would mention something about vampire legends in the Rhode Island area. The Providence Journal, whatever Halloween, they'd run like a snippet about this famous vampire that we had in Rhode Island, etc. And I was always fascinated by it. But when I would mention it to other people, I'd say, "Isn't it cool? We have vampires, here in Rhode Island." And a lot of folks would look at me like I was nuts. They had no idea what I was talking about. So it was very little known. And yep, there we go. There's Mercy's gravestone, certainly our most famous vampiric resident. And so because I thought, everybody knows about the Salem witches. Every town has ghost stories. Walk into a bookstore, there's a dozen local ghost story books and things like that. So why doesn't anybody know about this remarkable vampire folklore? And so over the years, I had collected snippets from the newspaper. Every time I saw one, I would keep a hold of it. And I thought, what might be cool was to publish them in a pamphlet form. There was a really cool old used bookstore in my hometown that sold little chaplets of local poetry and stuff like that. And I thought I could do that. I could do this like 10-page little kind of stapled in the middle magazine style book of all the different newspaper articles about vampires. And wouldn't that be cool? And the fellow who ran the bookstore said that's a great idea. Was willing to sell copies of it. But as I collected everything together, he advised me that I couldn't just reprint newspaper articles. There had to be a context for them. There were copyright issues and everything else. And so he sort of guided me this way and he guided me that way. He got me to write some introduction. I had no aspirations to be a writer, none whatsoever. And before you know it, he had me writing, and I was writing summaries of the stories and kind of dramatizing them and things like that. And before you knew it, I'd written 80 pages and had the sort of basis of my first book. And this very, very kind man who ran the bookstore said, "Listen, it's well beyond anything I can publish for you at this point, but I think it's a cool book. Why don't we see if we can find you a publisher?" And so he assisted me in locating a couple of local publishers. And lo and behold, I had written a book about vampires. And that was my first big break. And for a long time, it kind of became known as the Vampire Guy, and which got old a little bit. But after I did a couple of books on vampires, I thought, I still love ghost stories. I still love monsters. Let's branch out, and the rest is essentially history. I published with traditional publishers for the first 10 years or so, and when that started to sort of run dry because the publishing industry has changed a great deal over the last few decades, I decided to take a shot at self-publishing, and Ghost Boy Press was born. And over the last almost 10 years, I've been putting out my own stuff, and I would never go back.
Yeah, I mean, and if we could stick with hauntings for a minute, there's an old newspaper adage, and I'll probably butcher it. When there's legends and the facts, always print the legend, right?
Yes.
And a lot of times, I'm sure it's difficult because, on the one hand, some of these stories are, you know, historically relevant. They're great stories, they're scary stories, or whatever. How do you walk the line between, I want to look into this legend to get the facts attached to it, but at the same time, you don't want to minimize the legend and the fun that people have in believing those things, um, and all the stories that come from them. So, is it just a case of, and I'm not suggesting I'm going to go in and just blow this thing up, because I think you see the value of mythology and folklore. But talk to us a little bit about that process and that line where you're bringing facts but not necessarily destroying the legend, or the stories attached to it.
So it's actually a really good question because I consider myself a storyteller, not a historian. But I try very, very hard. I make a point of being as historically, keeping my historical integrity, and I don't make stuff up. I will use embellishments to make a story more fun. Those embellishments are always framed in the, as atmosphere. I never add facts where facts don't belong. But you have to dress things up. You have to, when you're telling a story about people who lived 200 or 300 years ago, you don't know what they said at any given moment. So you can weave some dialogue for them or set the scene, and that's acceptable because that's within artistic license. There was a wonderful writer named Bob Cahill who used to write all these little books. I'm sure some of your older viewers have seen these. There were thin little books they call like New England's, creepiest ghosts and New England's naughty navy and things like that. And he was the sheriff up in Salem for years, and he wrote all these very, very folkloric stories, all
Got a
based.
couple of them behind me over there. I'm trying desperately to point at my bookshelf.
But those are great fun, and I really
Yeah.
cut my teeth on those when I was a kid. But I remember when I was doing research for the first vampire book, he retells the story of Sarah Tillinghast, one of our wonderful 18th century vampire legends, and he talks about the fact that, or he talks about the idea that Sarah, who is the vampire in the story, was said to be exceptionally cruel. When she was slaughtering the pigs, she would lick the blood off her fingers like jelly or jam and things like that. And I read that and I went, where in the name of heck did you come up with that? That's clearly absolute nonsense. And so I resolved to myself that being a storyteller doesn't mean you have to sell somebody a bill of goods, that you don't have to add things that characterize a person in a really unlikely way. And I didn't think that that was a fair thing to do. So I try really hard to walk that line. I keep my stories fun. I want to keep the atmosphere up. I embellish them when they need atmosphere, but I'll never add facts. And so, yeah, it's a little bit of a delicate line to walk. It's a little bit of a tightrope game, but I love it. I love doing that because I want to be able to tell these stories in a way that if I'm telling them to a historian, that they understand that I've got some integrity. But if I'm telling to kids, they're still going to think it's really spooky. So you got to find that balance, and that's what being a storyteller slash historian folklorist is about, is keeping that integrity but also keeping things fun.
Okay, so all of our viewers out there, take the kids out of the room right now because we're going to talk seriously. Now, out of all the legends or hauntings or events that you've investigated, not necessarily written about, but just looked into, is there one in particular, or maybe there's a list of them, but isn't there one in particular that you went, oh my God, this is such BS. This is terrible. This is awful. We've been telling this story. I mean, this is a complete fabrication. So we don't want to burst anybody's bubble, but is there one out there in particular that you're like, mm-mm?
There are stories that I have loved for years and years and years because they are wonderful New England legends that I have ultimately not been able to find anything to back them up whatsoever. And so, in some cases, I've decided as a result of that just not to include them in a book or not to include them in a program. In other cases, I treat them like a legend because the thing about legends is that legends have value even if there isn't any historic truth behind them. I think one of my favorites, a good example of what you're talking about, is the story in Stowe, Vermont, of Emily's Bridge. Emily's Bridge is a wonderful old legend about supposedly a jilted young woman named Emily in the mid 19th century who had a lover who claimed he was going to come back for her. They chose to meet at this old covered bridge in the middle of town. They were going to meet there, so she went to meet him at the appointed time, and he didn't come. And hours went by, and she waited through the night. And when she realized she realized he wasn't coming. She threw herself off the bridge to her death and haunts the bridge to this day. And she's supposed to be a fairly malevolent ghost. She potentially attacks young men as if it was her, the lover that jilted her and things like that. And it is this wonderful story. And every time a New England Legends program comes up on the Travel Channel or any of those kind of things, they always do Emily's Bridge. She's in 100 books and everything else. So I loved this story and I wanted to share it. So I did so much research into it, and there is zero historical basis for this. This is absolutely zero historical basis for it. And so, because the story is so beloved, and because I feel like it's still a good story, it's a great example of how these legends grow and become a part of who we are. I included it, but I made sure to be very specific that there was no history behind it, at least none that I could find, that it appeared to be a fabricated story. That doesn't make it invalid or doesn't make it, non-valuable to us, but the way I try to approach things. So I would say Emily's Bridge is certainly one of the ones that's really high up there on the list of wonderful nonsense that we need to keep, but we also need to know that it's not true.
Yeah, this is going to be a 4 hour marathon with, and we'll get George in here, but God, I could talk about this stuff forever. There's a couple of directions I want to go in. Let's start with this one. When you were talking about myths, legends, folklore, how many of those are parables? Um, let's say every campus in the United States is haunted. There is usually a co-ed who took her own life because she was pregnant, or there is a mad killer that wanders the campus. And these, to me, are parables, right? Don't have unprotected sex, don't go out alone at night. And they're passed down from seniors to sophomores to incoming freshmen, just like our mom saying, don't go in the woods, there's a monster out there. Or maybe your mom said, the monster's out there, go to him. I don't know. I mean, I'm not judging here. But how many?
I do have my parents to thank for a lot of my love of stories like that. My
Yeah.
mother let me borrow the Amityville Horror when I was like 9 years old, and that scared the bejeebers out of me. My father used to take us up to the local graveyard and tell us ghost stories and everything else. So had a great influence on my love of these kind of stories, and I very much love them for that. But you're right, 100% right. I mean, let's face it. Every story about the mysterious killer, and the young couple who go down to Lover's Lane, and they hear something scratching at the window, so they drive home as fast as they can. And when they get home, the hook is still stuck in the door, that kind of stuff. And every single time you hear one of these stories, the participants in the story were always up to something. They were either having an assignation in the car, or they were somewhere they weren't supposed to be. And so yes, it's always a cautionary tale. Just all of Grimm's fairy tales were like that. The original Grimm's fairy tales rarely had happy endings. You know that in Little Red Riding Hood, in the original version of the story, she doesn't get rescued. She gets gobbled up by the wolf along with her grandmother. And the moral of the story is, do what your parents say and don't talk to strangers. And so all of these were meant,
Yeah.
and the reason these stories hold on is because they do teach us lessons. about life. And I don't think that these ghost stories would be as important to us if we didn't feel that they at least had some kind of lesson to be learned. And I think people have often pointed out that most of the best horror movies have a weirdly conservative moral sort of a moral compass in them, because it's always the virgin girl who lives to the end. The kids
Of
that are
course.
smoking dope and and getting busy in the backseat of a car are always the ones to die. And so it really does have that kind of like that a moral majority angle to it, which is funny because those people hate horror movies, but I think the horror movies are doing their work for them.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Now, all right, you can let the children back in the room, everyone. We're done with bursting their bubbles.
I
So
try to keep it PG rated anyway.
you tell them the monsters are there. We are non-judgmental as far as that. Okay, so getting into territorialism, New England in general. Every state, every country around the globe has its ghost stories. Um, and every state in this union has their ghost stories. Some may be more than others, but New England seems to be the kind of jumping off point or mothership, and I'm sure that clearly and obviously goes back to our early settlers. So when we're looking at the Sarah Tillinghast or Mercy Brown or Nellie Vaughan vampire legends, what I wanted you to kind of talk to us about a little bit is, because you can speak about it much better than I can, but the idea of what European settlers wrought here, what they brought here in terms of superstitions and things like that suddenly found themselves manifested in the most grotesque ways possible here, and how how that affected really an entire region, and most interestingly, some of those ideals still exist today, don't they?
You think so? Yeah. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. You got to figure that New England is the oldest European settled place, in the U.S. First of all, so we have these wonderful houses and cemeteries that date back centuries. The people who came here and their families stayed here. It makes sense that if you were going to hitch up a wagon and head out west, you were probably a pretty brave soul, which means you may not have been the most superstitious sort, so they may not have carried a lot of their superstitions with them when they traveled across the country. The people who wanted to stay close to home were more sort of afraid to go outside their neighborhood, are likely the ones that carried their superstitions or kept their superstitions close to their heart. So it does make sense to me that those superstitions, like the people, took root here in New England, and we are really proud of our ghosts. New England, we love our ghosts like there was, like nothing. We are, we're proud of it. Every single inn and every single bed and breakfast in every town, has its local ghost stories and everything else. There's ghost tours everywhere, and we love it. So it makes sense to me that that happened. We also we co-opted some of the native beliefs and things like that. You find some of that seeping into and mixing with some of the the many different cultures. We had the Huguenots that came here from France. We had the Germans and the Scots who came here, the German Hessians who came over here, the Scots and Irish who came over here, who all brought their various legends with them, and it all mixed into this big melting pot that has become the sort of gruesome, ghostly tales that we have. And one thing I think is kind of wonderful is that while All Hallows Eve and Halloween was a big deal for the Irish people, it was never a huge event in the old world. But when the Irish settlers came here, they brought that tradition with them, and it took on a new life here in the U.S. And nobody does Halloween like the U.S. does. It may not be our holiday, from the start, but boy, I tell you, we have made it our own, and nobody does Halloween like we do. So again, we love our ghosts, and we've been in love with them since the beginning.
Is Halloween still? And I want to bring George in here. We're gonna let him take a run at this here. Is Halloween still the most profitable holiday that we have? I mean,
I think it's neck and neck with Christmas, to be honest with you.
in, it is neck and neck with the amount of candy and costumes and parties and everything like that. So that's pretty amazing. I want to bring in George here. Let's do that. And before, as he takes us to the top of the hour in our break, Chris, George, Chris, as if you've like never met each other, right?
Only about 100 times.
I'll be back.
We'll make this 101. Um, Boy, I can only imagine. I'm not an outdoors person. I am just simply not, especially here in Florida, it was 98 degrees today. Give me my air conditioning.
I would not survive that. I can tell you right now. I'm a winter boy. I was born in January. I've got ice water in my veins.
Wait a minute. I'm born in January.
You were you born down there?
No, New Jersey.
Lord knows how you do it. Then I could never do it.
Air conditioning. Plain and
Yep.
simple. Air conditioning the house to the car to the location, back to the car. You sprint through. It's like, you try to avoid raindrops. I try to avoid the rays of the sun as much as possible. You must be, because you're up there in that area where you have some beautiful weather in the fall, beautiful weather in the spring, you must be a blast at campfires.
I love telling campfire stories more than almost anything else. It is absolutely delightful. I actually currently what I do for my day job. I'm an educator at Mystic Seaport Museum, and so right now we're in summer camp season, which means every week we get a new crop of kids coming in,
Look at
and
that.
I love to tell them stories like nothing else. And so I always try to pull a story out of my back pocket for them, when things are quiet or when I think they're getting restless. And so I have a lot of what I call gentle monster stories, monster stories that I can tell that just they're not too gory, but the kids love it. The kids want the monster stories. I have a kindergarten class that I do at one of our local schools here, and every single time I tell them a story, they go, "That's not scary enough. Tell us something scarier." So I usually have to kind of really, measure exactly what I'm going to tell them, but they love the monsters. They really
Get
do.
the consent signatures of the parents beforehand. I'm sure you can go down a rabbit hole.
We try really hard not to. I will say this that last year at one of my schools, we decided to do a topic on the origin of Halloween. And while talking about the origins of Halloween, it's easy to get fairly dark because it is a holiday that's about sort of people passing, sort of from this life to the next. And the kids started asking some pretty tough questions, and so I navigated around it as well as I could. But we got onto some fairly heavy stuff. These kids were asking questions, and I thought, I've got to treat these kids with respect. I'm not going to tell them, I just can't talk to you about that. So, I use some very measured responses, but yeah, sometimes you've got to be careful what you say, but you also have to treat kids like people. I think too often kids get treated like they don't have these kind of questions, or they're not capable of handling it. And if you do so gently, you can talk to kids about a lot of stuff that most people think they're not ready for.
I bet it kind of gives them a little bit of a incentive as well, especially in today's day and age where this rules above all.
Yeah.
But to read and do research about some of the things that you're talking about, perhaps even those who look at it with a bit of skepticism. He's just making this up. Go look it up. It's right there. You can find it. So I like that part of it.
Virtually every story that I tell was only a few exceptions. I mean, I'll tell some, old folk tales and fairy tales from time to time, but almost everything I tell will have at least some element of truth to it. For my kids a few days ago, I told them a story of Crookjaw, which is a legend from Nantucket, which I discovered not that long ago, but I absolutely love. It's about basically an enchanted whale, a sea witch, and all these kind of wonderful things. But it all centers on a man named Ichabod Paddock, who was a whaling captain in Nantucket in the late 1600s and early 1700s, who was a real person. And how these legends grew up around him, it's hard to say, but it was a wonderful story. And so, again, I decided to share it with the kids. And at the end, they asked me to tell it again. And I said, I'm not going to just tell you the story again back to back. So they begged me to write it down. So I actually transcribed the story for them. And every one of the kids in the class wanted a copy of it. And I thought, you know what? Getting to tell kids a spooky story to me is my bread and butter. But getting them to read, to willingly read, that is such a win in my book. So I was thrilled.
Big time, absolutely. Um, I have to ask about the stories, and you're kind of giving me the answer to it. Um, does the story warrant credibility to be a good story?
It doesn't have to be. I mean, I was talking earlier with Ken about the story of Emily's Bridge, this wonderful ghost story from Stowe, Vermont, and we know we're virtually certain that it is based on nothing. That it was probably either made up by an innkeeper as just a fun story to tell a guest, or that one of those stories that at the very least any origin to it seems to be lost to time. But the story itself is rich, it's wonderful, and it's really iconic. And so, because it's so iconic, the fact that it doesn't appear to be based on a historical figure doesn't make the story any less valid and any less important, because the great thing about ghost stories is that they do tell us about ourselves. These are, I think Ken used this phrase earlier, they're a mirror sort of to look at ourselves in. We wonder what does exist beyond death, and how do we deal with a broken heart, and is there somebody waiting for us on the other side, and these kind of things. And this is what sort of inspires us to create these stories, whether they're based on historic people or whether they're just made up around a campfire. And I think that makes them very important, whether or not they have a historical basis. On the other hand, I don't like to tell stories that I know are not historically based without qualifying them and letting people know that we don't know whether this story is based on anything true. I like to say I don't know because I don't like to use absolutes. I never tell somebody that something is absolutely true, because if I wasn't there, I don't know it was. And I never tell somebody something's absolutely not true, because you cannot prove a negative. But I will always qualify it and say, to the best of my knowledge, this story is folkloric. It's fictionalized, but that doesn't mean the story doesn't have value.
Let's, Chris, let's take this in the way of social media with regards to this field. Back in the day, it was just the cable channels, but now it's on every possible platform you can imagine. Somebody out there is, a quote unquote expert in what it is that they do. If you're able to, whether it's now current or in the past, view some of these, were any of these inspirational, or were they primarily aggravating? Like you knew behind the scenes what they're saying was just a bunch of bunk.
There are some stories that we already know are based on nonsense that have taken on a life of their own. Slender Man is a great example. I mean, that's a creepy story. It's a very, very creepy story, but we also know that it's absolutely nonsense. And unfortunately, that's the kind of story that has become corrosive. It's become toxic. It's ended up resulting in violence and things like that. So people who take completely fictional stories or these made up modern sort of meme stories and things like that and run with them, I think that goes too far in the wrong direction. It is fine to tell a campfire story, and those campfire stories, again, can be incredibly entertaining. But when it starts to roll itself into a belief system for people, then it becomes dangerous. So there's always that line you have to walk, where you make sure that even when you're telling a completely fictional story, or a story that has some basis in history, that you don't let it get out of hand. And that's something that I do encounter a lot, because so many of the stories that I deal with, especially the legends, they they have things that get tacked onto them over the course of time. With the vampire stories, they're a great example, because so many of the vampire stories, people say that when they opened her coffin, that there were scratch marks on the lid. Clearly, she'd been trying to get out, or different things like that that we know is not true. And unfortunately, there is a difference between embellishing a story with atmosphere and adding facts that change the narrative or change what happened, and that's not responsible, unfortunately. And as a folklorist, you should know better than to ever do that kind of thing. But unfortunately, that's the curse of the internet. Is people assume if you see it on the internet, somebody has a 3 second or a 30 second YouTube video saying this kind of thing happened. Everything's a TikTok clip, and they're so short right now, and they just throw out a bunch of nonsense and people take it at face value, and that's unfortunate. I think that it is, like many things in the paranormal field, I think that it's ultimately doing damage rather than enriching the field.
Now, as a folklorist, is there ever a drive? 'Cause you know what Ken does, you know what I do, and it's the pursuit of evidence, the pursuit of proof of what it is that people are experiencing. You go to a haunted location, you hear the claims, and you try to back up those claims with evidence. As a folklorist, is it difficult sometimes to not go down that path and just stick to collecting the story, getting the history behind it, and not trying to validate that particular folklore?
It's a little bit of it's kind of one from column A and one from column B, because
Okay.
I do not generally pursue a paranormal angle when I'm working on a folk tale. If I'm working on a folk tale, I'm often curious about the historical basis for it and less concerned at that stage about any hauntings that are connected to it, even if it's a haunted story. And there's as I say, there's a little bit of that to it. I mean, I think probably the best example I can come up with is one of my defining moments in my career was when I was attempting to write an annotated version of The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, which had been something I'd wanted to do for many, many years. And in the process of doing that, I decided I was going to reprint Irving's original story and then put a lot of fun facts connected to it. Because what I knew is that Washington Irving had based characters like Ichabod Crane, like Katrina Van Tassel, and many of the other characters in the story on real characters from Sleepy Hollow's history. And I also knew that the Headless Horseman character was inspired by Irish folklore. There's a headless ghost in Irish folklore called the Doulahan. There's a German folktale about a fellow named Hans Jägenteufel, who's a headless sort of a devil character. And I knew he had taken a lot of those myths and rolled them into his figure of the Headless Horseman. But one of the interesting things about Irving is that Irving was a satirist, but he wasn't making stuff up most of the time. Most of the time, he was taking real local folklore and, like I say, embellishing it to make a fun story out of it. And so he references frequently when he tells the story the fact that he first heard the story from, one of the old Dutch wives sitting around the fireplace and things like this. I also knew that Irving had spent a lot of his childhood from about the time he was 15 to 17 in Sleepy Hollow, getting out of New York City where there was an outbreak of the yellow fever. And so he spent a lot of time there, heard those folk tales. And I was like, so if Irving is retelling a folk tale that really does exist in the Sleepy Hollow area, where did that folk tale come from? And so I was able to get a little tidbit of information from a wonderful historian down in Sleepy Hollow named Henry John Steiner that referenced a military journal and talked about a real Hessian German soldier who'd actually been decapitated in a battle just a few days after the Battle of White Plains, and that decapitation was only about 9 miles from the village of Sleepy Hollow. And I thought, that's just a bizarre coincidence. It's got to have something to it. And so with some research, I was able to track down the identity of the decapitated soldier, who, as it happened, died on November 1st. And November 1st is All Hallows Day. It's the day that gives us Halloween. And I thought, that's crazy. There's no way that was a coincidence. And so there you had the history that actually backed up what we had long thought was a completely fictional ghost. The character of the Headless Horseman had long been assumed to be entirely Washington Irving's imagination or based entirely on folklore, but actually seems to have been based on a real soldier actually killed in exactly the same way that Irving describes it in the book. And that was a really nice moment for me. As for the haunting aspect of it, I couldn't help myself. Of course, I wondered, in the case of a violent death like a soldier, losing his head in a battle, these are often the kind of things that are supposed to lead to hauntings. And as I've said before, I'm not a complete skeptic. I'm just skeptical. And so I thought, it's actually perfectly possible that the ghost of this Headless Horseman does still actually wander in the Sleepy Hollow area. So I don't rule out the existence of the ghost of the Headless Horseman whatsoever. One of the greatest ghosts in American folklore, and it may well be a genuine haunting. So to me, I try really hard, as I say, to balance those two things, the folklore, the history, and the paranormal side of it. I just tend to lean more into the folklore than the paranormal.
Yeah, but it certainly adds to the story. It makes people think twice telling that story to just take it as fiction when the facts are right behind it. That's just what's amazing to me. As I bring Ken back on screen, we're going to go ahead and take our top of the hour break. And when we come back, I want to talk monsters.
I loves me some monsters.
Monsters.
All right, Ken, if you want to go ahead and take us a break, thank you guys. Stay with us. We have another hour with a very special guest, Chris Rondina. You're watching Dead Air Sunday Night Live. We'll be back right after these messages.
We'll be right back after these commercial messages.
Now showing on Dead Air Full Spectrum YouTube channel.
episodes of Extremely Strange coming soon.
Every alternate Thursday on our channel.
Every Thursday. Opposite. Well, that was weird.
In cemeteries across the world, some headstones hold more than just names and dates. They preserve cherished family recipes, etched in stone as a lasting tribute. These recipes are more than instructions for a dish. They are connections to loved ones, memories of shared meals, and a way to keep traditions alive. In this series, we'll be honoring these unique culinary legacies by bringing these recipes to life. With respect and gratitude, we'll cook the dishes exactly as they were meant to be enjoyed.
New episodes of Last Bite coming soon.
Welcome to my party, we're just getting started. A life is a dream or a nightmare scarring. Hand me a drink cause I think I'm going all in. Get me a shrink who can catch me when I'm falling. Cover up my scars, flip the handlebars. Crashing in my car, wake up in a bar. I'll be a superstar, just on my avatar. This world is so bizarre, empty out the reservoir. Yeah, I'm taking 6 shots, yeah, straight to the face. And I wanna get lost, I'm sick of this place. Don't know how to stop when I'm feeling this way. So I'm taking 6 shots till I'm feeling okay. I think I'm going crazy, don't think I'll get home safe. So I'm taking 6 shots, all straight to the face. I'm taking 6 shots, are you coming with me? I'm taking 6 shots, yeah, straight to the face. And I wanna get lost.
All right.
And now back to the show. You know, I'm still aggravated about what you told me, Ken, about that hack that has decided to start using the same artists that we do for their show.
Somebody's making money off of
I
it.
should have signed an exclusive contract with them before doing this. That'd be it.
Hey,
Welcome back.
I'm gonna let you guys get to it here, George. You can give you a few more minutes here because we're gonna tackle some other things.
Yeah, not a problem. Welcome back to the show, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back, Chris Rondina, a folklorist. And I tell you what, right now, he's got me really grasped and with my attention as far as what he's talking about with these stories. But I want to transfer that over to now monsters. I want to get into that topic a lot with you, and
I'm ready.
this is something that is not just keeping you interested and focused in New England. You're going places, my friend.
A few years ago, I decided that I would not go on vacation if I couldn't track down a monster or a legend. And so it actually all started out when I wrote my first book about vampires years and years ago. I came up with the crazy idea that I should go to Transylvania and that would be a really nice kind of a launch for the book. It wasn't actually strictly necessary, but that didn't stop me. So I hopped on a plane and I spent 3 weeks traveling around Transylvania on the trail of Dracula and kind of caught the bug for it. And so yeah, I've spent some time in Germany, some time on the trail of Frankenstein, time in England on the trail of both Dracula and another historic vampire from northern England, some time recently in France on the trail of a historic werewolf. So like I say, I don't go on vacation unless there's a monster to be found.
I like how you use the term on the trail. You're slowly catching up to him as an investigator. What have you caught that would be surprising to our viewers? What have you discovered just on those two topical creatures? Because you know as well as I do, particularly as of late, there's been more vampire movies. There's a new Frankenstein movie that's coming out here very, very
I'm
soon.
very excited about.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm wondering what is it that your investigations, your research have produced that most people are not even aware of at this point?
So one of the things that I kind of have made a bargain with myself about is that I try not to write a book unless I can bring something new to the conversation. And that's not always easy. I mean, there have been, hundreds of books written about Dracula, about Frankenstein, about all these different figures. But I always try to find a new angle, some way to approach it that is a fresh take on it. And when I was working on the Dracula book, which I did a few years back, called Hunting Dracula, I thought one of the big arguments that's been raging, sort of throughout vampire fandom and Dracula fandom for years now is there's a lot of people who are happy to say that Bram Stoker based the character of Dracula on the 15th century Romanian nobleman Vlad Dracula, who everybody likes to call Vlad the Impaler, as if it was his real name. It wasn't his name; it was what enemies called him. He was called Vlad Dracula. That was how he signed his papers, and that's what he referred to himself as. But there is a whole secondary contingent of people who insist that that's absolute nonsense, that the references to the historic Dracula in the novel Dracula are minimal, and that he didn't know anything about the figure, blah, 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 blah. And I thought somewhere in there is some truth. And so one of the big arguments against the idea of Dracula being based on or inspired by this historic figure is the idea that according to Bram Stoker's notes, and he kept some fairly extensive notes when he was writing the novel Dracula, there are no references to Vlad Dracula, none whatsoever. He does use the name Dracula, obviously. And the thing is that Stoker had been working on the book for a few years with a different title, a different name for the vampire, and a lot of different details. The original title of the book was simply going to be called The Undead. The original name of his main character, or his vampire, was Count Wampir, which literally is just a Slavic word for vampire. So his name of his character was Count Vampire, effectively. And the novel was going to be set in Styria, which is a sort of a province on the border of Germany that had a lot of vampire folklore connected with it. Somewhere along the way, he found a book, probably in the little English town of Whitby, that made a couple of references to this historic figure of Dracula. And from it, he took the name Dracula, which he liked because supposedly it meant son of the devil. He liked the idea of Transylvania, so he changed the location of Transylvania, changed the name of the character, and made some, according to some people's arguments, cosmetic changes to the book. My argument was that the changes in the book are not cosmetic, and he does make several historical references where he has the character of Dracula regale Jonathan Harker with bits of history that are clearly a reference to this historic figure. So I was able to track down references in his notes to several other books that specifically reference the character of Vlad Dracula, and that bust the idea that he didn't know anything about the character. So I was able to sort of, at least I think convincingly put forth the argument that Stoker knew much more about the historic Dracula than some people claim that he did. On the other hand, he did end up changing it to Dracula very, very late in the game. So he'd already written the story, already come up with his vampire, and he had already set most of it in stone. So the changes were more than cosmetic. They were deeper than that. But yes, they were heavily influenced by the character of Dracula. And then he superimposes the character, this historic, fairly brutal 15th century ruler, onto his vampire character to give him, verisimilitude, basically, to make him a believable character. And so somewhere in between the it's nonsense and he's completely based on it, you have this middle ground that's the actual truth of it. So I felt like I thought it was a worthy addition to the discussion of the character of Dracula. And so that's the approach that I took with him. And so my discoveries largely were just that Stoker did know more than it is strictly contained in his notes. That not all of his notes may have survived. There may have, in fact, been pages that we never saw. He spent time traveling in America around the time that he was writing Dracula. He was familiar with certain American pieces of vampire folklore, including the story of Mercy Brown, who I believe he possibly incorporated elements of Mercy Brown's story into one of the characters from the novel Dracula. So American vampire folklore may have actually, right here in New England, may have actually influenced elements of the novel Dracula, which I think is fascinating. So these are all the things that I was trying to bring to the table when I wrote the book.
Was there any evidence or hints of evidence in Bram Stoker's original story that there was a count of some wealth and power purchasing property in England, in London?
Not that I'm aware of. I don't believe that the actual events, the modern day events of Dracula, are based on anything specific. There are some people who have actually hinted, or more than hinted, but like outright stated that it was meant to be a sort of interpretation of the Jack the Ripper story, which I think feels highly unlikely because the only thing between the Jack the Ripper story and the Dracula story is a shadowy figure killing women, and I think that everything about it, everything about it sort of, ends right there. That's all the similarity right there. But some people have insisted that he was trying to sort of, interpret the Jack the Ripper story that way. I don't really think that's true. No one that I know of, again, sort of matches any kind of historical profile for a character like that. So his vampire in London, probably not based on anything historic. I believe that more likely than not, what he was doing is sort of reinterpreting an older vampire story written
Yeah.
by an Irish author named J. Sheridan Le Fanu, who had written Carmilla several years earlier, which involved a female vampire. But I believe that he took a lot of what made Carmilla popular and incorporated it into his novel. I feel bad saying this about Stoker. Stoker's career as a writer was pretty disastrous. Most of his books never went anywhere, and he wasn't considered a particularly good writer. But somehow, out of the blue, he came up with this sort of magnum opus of a novel that has become the most famous vampire novel and the most popular vampire novel ever written. And to this day, more than a century and a quarter later, has never been out of print. So it's hard to see exactly how this fairly limited writer came up with such a wonderful story, but I think he really did it by borrowing on people who went before him. He wasn't disastrous. Dracula is a unique book and has a lot of great characters in it, so he did a great job creating it. But I feel like he was standing on the shoulders of others to create that story.
Yeah, I can only imagine because again, you can you can even see in film today those people who really put some thought and depth into the characters and into the story, and then you have slasher films,
Right.
where it's on a city block, or some township, Elm Street as an example. So, having all of that depth is just it's incredible that that's the only thing that he really did successfully. One more question before we bring Ken back in for you, and that's the perspective and perception in your travels. One of interest is going to Transylvania uh, as an American, and you're talking to, I would imagine, not just historians in those areas, but some of the locals as well. Do you get kind of a chuckle about that? I mean, I'm sure they know how infectious it is here in the States, but to them, is it kind of like this is getting a little old?
It depends on who you meet, and honestly, much like here in America, it depends on where you are. If you're in the city, to people it's just children's stories and it's laughable, and there's no, you don't see the traces of Dracula in the cities unless you go into a shop or something. You're always likely to find a copy of the book. But when you're in the small villages, absolutely. When you're in the small village, the people there, are still fairly superstitious. If you go into small villages, especially. So Transylvania is the northwestern portion of what we call modern day Romania. The borders of there have changed so constantly, but the people there are still pretty much living like they lived centuries ago. You have tiny little villages with thatch roof huts, a little stone church in the middle of every village, and if you're trying to drive through the middle of a town, chances are you're going to have to stop to let 100 sheep cross the road. And that's not hyperbole. We literally had to stop for sheep to cross the road, and
I lived
usually
in Germany. I know what you're talking about.
yeah. So those folks still hold on to a lot of the old beliefs, and some of them still believe these old things. And what's interesting about the people of Romania is not that they still hold on to these old superstitions, but the idea that their perspective on Dracula is very different than ours, because to them Dracula is very much like a King Arthur figure. Dracula was notable because he was a very strong ruler, but he was also said to be very brutal. And that was what Romania, or Transylvania, needed at that time, because you had the Ottoman Turkish invasion happening, and they were trying to basically flood over the country. And Dracula's brutal tactics drove them back again and again and again. And so a lot of the Romanians believe that in the country's time of greatest need, that Dracula will actually return, and that he will, sort of rise again to lead them. I'm not sure I buy into that, because I feel like its time of greatest need was definitely when that dictator Ceausescu, ruled Romania for years. You'd think he'd have come back then, but even still, it's just fascinating to see what their perspective on that. By the way, Mary Beth, you had asked a question earlier, and the particular series you're talking about was called Necroscope. Just so you're aware of that. So I'm sorry, I'm trying to pick up on questions here and there, but oh, there you go. Yep, yeah. So the Necroscope series, absolutely, which I only read the first of, but I thought they were a great deal of fun. I can't always pick up on the questions. I'm afraid I've got ADD. I can't always concentrate on everything at once. But if I see a question, I'll try to answer it.
As we bring Ken back on the screen here, one thing I do want to know again: all these different monsters that you've researched, come across any?
I haven't yet, which is kind of a shame, because I keep thinking, I think that if I was, if my friends kept telling me to be careful in the mountains of France, and I thought, if I actually get eaten by a werewolf, that would certainly be a great epitaph. I mean, I definitely couldn't go out in a better way than that. So, but no, not yet. I have not managed to get myself killed in a foreign country yet, although I've worked on it. I've tried pretty hard.
As far as we know, you could have already been bitten, and you just have a different nightlife we're not aware of. Ken,
My scariest experience was letting myself get lost in the woods beneath Castle Frankenstein.
oh my God, yeah, you don't know which way you're going in the middle of the night and something like that. And those forests are thick, absolutely.
Well, like, of course, like a genius, I left the path because I was trying to find my way to the castle, and it was taking too long. So I was like, I'll just walk into the woods, and that'll be fine. I did eventually find my way there, but it's a miracle that I lived through that one.
You're a brave soul, my friend, to say the least. Ken, I turn it back over to you, and I will be back with you, Chris, towards the closing of the show.
Fantastic.
Okay.
I appreciate
Thank you,
it.
George. And while we're talking about Frankenstein's castle, let's just give everybody a little bit of an idea of what we're talking about here. Now, there are more developed parts of this property, are there not? I mean,
There is. There's a
I'm
restaurant on the property, which was closed when I was there. But there's a restaurant on the property. But the castle itself is still quite a ruin. It's been a worse ruin than it is right now. Obviously, they understand that it's a viable tourist attraction, so they've done some restoration work. I will say this much, though: they tried to keep the restoration fairly in keeping with the original castle. That their sketches still exist of dating back several hundred years. So they've tried to keep it pretty, again, keep the integrity up.
Yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit before we get out of here tonight, addressing our audience. Ladies and gentlemen, run, do not walk to Ghost Boy Press to see Chris's entire catalog of books. Now, if you are looking for something that's well written, well researched, um, the truth behind some of these legends, and if we're being honest here, something a little spooky every once in a while, then I strongly suggest that you visit Ghost Boy Press and take a look around there and see this kind of thing. So, give you a little example here. Happy Summerween. Christopher loves Halloween. My God, it's like 90. It's touched 100 here in New England, and all Chris does is post pictures of leaves turning and everything like that.
Hey, it's wishful thinking. I want the heat to end as much as anybody. There's nothing that would be better than a crisp October day right about now. I got to tell
Mm.
you, it's about 85 degrees in the room I'm sitting in right now.
So let's talk a little bit about some of these works. And I am particularly curious. Let me see if I can pull it up here. Hunting the Beast. And I wanted you to talk a little bit about that. Um, and the depths of research you went in on this. This was a fascinating legend that I've been aware of for forever and ever and ever. And you took a deep dive for all of us on behalf of all of us. So tell us a little bit about that.
So, the story of the Beast of Gévaudan is something that I've loved since I was a kid. I fell in love with werewolves when I was very, very young, and but this one always resonated with me because while so many other werewolf legends were just legends, this one had names and dates and historical figures connected to it, and so it was clearly a real historic event. And the thing about the Beast of Gévaudan is that it's supposedly stalked this remote region of France, sort of in south central France, for about 3 years, from 1764 to 1767, and that over the course of that period, it killed 100 people. And this animal or creature, whatever it was described as the locals by like a wolf, yet not a wolf, was alleged by some people to be twice the size of a natural wolf, to be able to stand on two legs, to make noises that sounded like human speech. And so, needless to say, it passed into werewolf legend, which is not surprising because France is chock full of werewolf legends. Most of them dated about a century or more earlier than the Beast of Gévaudan. But once this creature showed up and started killing people one by one by one, all these old werewolf legends started to rise to the surface again. And what makes this unique is, number one, that it was really killing people. So there was no questioning that this thing really existed. People were dying. The King of France, Louis XV, at that time was in a sort of locked in a battle with the church because the church still wanted to hold control over France at that time and keep people under the yoke of sort of religion and spirituality, while King Louis XV wanted to sort of introduce this new age of reason and sort of bring science back to the world. So the idea of a supernatural creature killing the peasantry was bad for the king, but it was great for the church because the church was able. The pews were absolutely overflowing with people who were coming in, and the preachers all telling them that this was the devil's penance, on them for being sinful and for drifting away from the church. So the werewolf legend basically continued to grow. But what was fascinating about it is that people would attack this thing. They would fire weapons at it. The peasants were not legally allowed to carry guns at that time. Only soldiers could. But people would shoot at this thing. It would either fall and get back up or shrug the bullets off. The king ended up sending literally thousands of dragoons, thousands of troops to the Gévaudan region. They couldn't stop the thing. They either couldn't find it, or when they spotted it, they would open fire on it. It would shrug off their bullets or get right back up again, and they would never be able to get there fast enough to catch the thing. So nobody knew what this creature was. And for 3 solid years, it continued to terrorize the region, killing people, en masse, frequently spanning huge, huge distances in short periods of time, even during the winter months when travel was incredibly difficult. So this thing really appeared to be supernatural in every possible way. Eventually, the king ended up hiring a very, very well-known hunter who had quite a reputation for killing wolves, called Dienneval, and sent him there. And Dienneval, after months of failing at the job, eventually brought back the carcass of a particularly large wolf, brought it to Versailles, showed it to the king. Everybody was like, that pretty much just looks like a big wolf. But the king said, good enough, it's done, the beast is dead. So the king declared the thing dead, the beast dead, and when reports of killings continued, the king said, nope, not going to listen, the beast is dead. So the king basically washed his hands of the whole thing. So it continued to kill for about another year and a half until finally a farmer that lived in that area by the name of Jean Chastel confronted the creature on the slopes of an area called Mont Mouchet, supposedly using a sanctified bullet, either made from like a medal of the Virgin Mary, or even possibly being made of silver. Shot the thing, killed it, and ended the reign of this beast forever. So it's a fascinating story, one that I've absolutely always loved. But the biggest question has always been, something was really there, absolutely there. What was it? Was it a werewolf? Was it, people have suggested it was an escaped lion that came from a local zoo or something like that escaped, that it was a striped hyena. People have speculated all these different things, that it was a serial killer. And what was it? So in the book, I do my best to debunk what I'm sure it was not true, which, by the way, one of the big arguments against this thing being a lion. People love to say it was a lion. Nobody would have known what a lion was back then. I was like, what are you, nuts? The main city in that part of France is Lyon. It's named for a lion and has a lion on its flag. I guarantee you people knew what a lion was. So the idea that soldiers saw this lion, didn't recognize it for what it was, is absurd to me. A striped hyena would have been an animal that was from an African environment. They certainly don't do well in cold environments. And that was during what was called the Little Ice Age, a historic period of desperately bad temperatures. It was one of the worst winters on record in the center of France at that time. So that thing would have had to survive through months of sub-zero temperatures and never migrate out of that region. To stay within that region for 3 years doesn't make a lick of sense to me. So I do my best to sort of unravel the mystery, and I come up with what I believe is a pretty compelling sort of solution for the mystery, which obviously I'm not going to spoil here because I would love it if some people would read the book. But so that was great fun. And one of the most remarkable things about that region of France is the beast has become their identity. I stayed in a little town called Sauga, which has a museum to the beast in there. But everywhere you go, there are statues of the beast. There are monuments to it. That one is in a little tiny village called Auvers, where a young woman by the name of Marie-Jeanne Vallée actually faced down the creature with a pike to protect her sister and managed to drive it off. But this is an interesting story because she drove a pike 3 inches into the creature's chest, and rather than acting like an animal, it said that it lifted up its paw and used its paw to cover the wound on its chest, which an animal, a dog or a wolf, literally physically could not do, and then threw itself into a river, which would carry it away, which an animal would not think to do. So I don't know about this thing being a natural animal of any kind. I think that definitely a different explanation for that. But yeah, it's just a remarkable story.
It is. It's like come to life, and I want to show some of these other works here, and then get into what's coming. Of course, we have warlocks and witchery,
Well,
devilish
it was
legends, and
good fun to
folklore.
write. That was, I decided to kind of come back to New England for a little while, do a book that I didn't have to travel halfway across the world to write. So
Yay.
I retell a lot of classic, sort of witchy and sort of magical or mystical folk tales about witches in possession from all over New England. And because I know that we have a lot of people out there in the world today who are practicing pagans, I try to take a very, very balanced approach to it. And at the end, I even include a few spells for somebody who wants to channel their own inner witch or warlock.
And we have another work here. My understanding this is a novel that's coming.
Yes, so I am actually going to try my hand at something I've never done before, and write my very first horror novel, which is going to be inspired by, some of you may have read, when you were younger, the Fear Street books or things like that. There was a huge period during the 80s and the 90s when these sort of young adult horror novels came out. This one's going to be a little more edgy. It's not going to be aimed at young adults, but I want to go for the classic young adult style slasher about a werewolf stalking a summer camp. And this is an idea I've had in the back of my head for decades, and I finally decided I want to do it. So Blood Moon Summer is it's in the hopper. When it's going to come out is yet to be determined. I promise I'll let you know.
Okay, let's take a look into our future here. Hunting Frankenstein, due out next year, and Hunting the Beast, which I assume is a follow-up of the Beast of Gurvadan.
It is indeed. So I decided that, having spent some time at Castle Frankenstein, that I would love to explore the Frankenstein legend much farther, which is based on several historical characters and some real sort of science and folklore from the time. So I want to hopefully in there get into everything from galvanism to modern medicine, and the idea of being able to resurrect people from the dead. I mean, if you think about it, we use electricity to resuscitate people now as a standard practice. So I wonder sometimes, was Mary Shelley prescient and that kind of thing. So I want to explore some of the deeper ramifications of the Frankenstein story. And the thing about werewolf folklore is that the Beast of Gévaudan is one that I love, but there's so many wonderful legends about real people who were part of the werewolf trials in the 16 and 1700s. And this particular story from Germany that I've wanted to revisit for years about the it was called the Werewolf of Bedburg, a fellow by the name of Peter Stump, whose trial was quite spectacular and was considered to be sort of worldwide top shelf, like front page news at that time. So we're going to explore the Werewolf of Bedburg and this great old German werewolf legend.
Is there, and I want to get some to, we have quite a few questions here from the audience tonight, but is there a certain responsibility that you feel to a community, a village, a region when writing about things in that particular community, legends and so forth? Because it seems that the common thing is, like you talked about, Gervedon, they embrace this. Sleepy Hollow embraces this. Romania embraces this. Germany embraces this. Is this something that goes into your thought process? Like, I want to go to a place where people are open and they are invested in this particular story. That has to make life a lot easier for you.
It's not necessarily a factor about whether I decide to visit someplace or not. I mean, obviously, I think about whether the people are going to be receptive or friendly when I go to someplace. I didn't know what kind of reception I would receive, in Gévaudan, because Gévaudan, which technically doesn't even exist anymore, it's a region that was a political region in its time. But all the towns that were part of Gévaudan still exist to this day. And so I didn't know what kind of reception I would get. Everyone was wonderfully friendly, and like I say, it turns out that they had sort of embraced the legend in a lot of important ways. Although what's interesting about Gévaudan is that Gévaudan does not have tourism connected to this that is from outside the region. You get locals, who come to the town for that, but they do not have a big tourism business connected to it. And you'd think that for a little tiny region like that, it's in a very, very quiet, very remote part of France, that they might trade on that a little bit to get a little bit of a financial boost out of it, but they don't seem to do that. I am always very, very conscious of the people, and I try as much as possible whenever I go to these places to talk to the locals, because you cannot get good stories if you don't talk to the locals. That's not always easy when you don't speak the language. I was very fortunate when I was in France, which I don't speak a word of French, to have a wonderful real-time translator with me, which I used to my great advantage. But yes, I try very hard to make sure that I'm always respectful to people, and I also try to write in a way that is respectful of the locals and respectful of the economy, respectful of the way people view these things, because I think that that's hugely important. So yeah, I consider it a responsibility, but it's also, I think it makes the stories more authentic if I realize that, if I care about the people that I'm talking about. I think that comes across in the stories, and I think it makes the stories more interesting, because I want the people to realize that these people were human. I think a really good example of that, it kind of occurred to me late in the process, is that when I was telling the story of the Headless Horseman, it's when I came to realize that the Headless Horseman is a myth, or is a legend, but that the person who was killed
Right.
there on that morning was a human being. And
Right.
so I
Right.
tried to tell his story too, and realized that this young man, who was only 24 years old, that he was real, and that in a way he died forgotten, and largely unidentified, thousands of miles from home. So I tried to tell his story too.
Yeah, that's a great point. All right, let's dig into some questions here, of which we have a few.
Of course.
All right, in no particular order. Joseph Freza would like to know, has there ever been a case where you couldn't confirm or debunk it? Were you ever left in a kind of limbo, I guess?
Absolutely, there is. In fact, I think one of the most notable ones that I investigated, that it was hard to come to a solid conclusion, is a little tiny town in the north of England, up in the Cumberland area, called Crogland. So when I was over in England, I thought, I might as well kill two birds with one stone, investigating Dracula, but there was another great vampire legend. So I traveled up to this little tiny village of Crogland. And when I say tiny, I'm talking about six houses and a pub that wasn't even open when I was there. The thing about the Crogland story is that the Crogland story was first published in the late 1800s, but it references events that seem to have happened at least a century earlier than that. And the story is told in a very matter-of-fact way that appears to be based on something historical, but historians have tried very hard to debunk it, saying that the place where it takes place, the house where it takes place, Crogland Grange, never existed, and that the chapel that's in the middle of the little village, isn't really the chapel that they refer to in the story. And there's a whole lot of things that don't seem to add up. So when I went there, I was able to locate the house that many people have said was probably Crogland Grange. But the part of the story that makes it interesting is that in the original version of the story, it's an important point that Crogland Grange is only a single floor. It's a one-story building, and it says in the story that at no point in history was it ever 2 stories. But Crogland Low Hall, which is often pegged to be Crogland Grange, is a 2-story building. And so people say that rules it right out. However, being there and actually approaching the building, I took photographs, and in the photographs, you can see 2 completely different stratas of building material, and you can see that the second floor was added at some point in history. So clearly, at one point, somebody added on a second floor to this building. Does that prove anything? Absolutely, it doesn't. But it is a compelling reason to think that yes, in fact, this may have been a 1-story building that a few centuries ago had a second story put on it. The existence of the Crogland vampire, almost impossible to peg, but there are some really interesting historic markers that make it a fascinating story. So I haven't given up on it. I believe that at least it has some basis in history. So yeah, that's a story that I can neither confirm nor deny. I choose to believe, based on what I've discovered, that it probably has at least a shred of historic basis.
Mm-hmm. All right, we'll move on. We got a couple from Jeff Hilton here, but here's one I think is kind of compelling. Jeff asks if Appalachia and the Scottish Highlands are the same mountain range. Can similar spirit energy move from country to country freely?
I'm not sure that I'm the most qualified person to answer that kind of question, but at the very least,
Pretty subjective.
yeah, but at least based on my own belief systems, I don't think that spirit energy is limited by anything except its own sort of perception, I suppose. I don't think there's any reason that spirit energy couldn't travel from place to place, from object to object, if the object, had some kind of connection to them. However, I also believe that many cases of what we consider to be hauntings are housebound because they are connected to the physical space that they're in. And I think that in the case of, for instance, my ghost story that I was telling at the beginning with the little girl, when I was 15, it seems to me that she is connected to that house because that was where she lived and died. And so in that case, may not be able to move from that space, but I don't know that every spirit or every entity is place bound like that. So yes, I think it's certainly within the realm of possibility for them to manifest from one place to another, whether it gets through 2 connected objects or through, you say a connected mountain range. You got to figure that the various sort of lifelines of the earth, ley lines, whatever you want to call them, may actually, be a route of travel for that kind of thing. I'm not a sort of a spiritual guru of any kind, so I'm kind of freeballing on this one, but yeah, I would think at the very least it seems possible.
That will have to be the next Rise Up discussion. Cody is still there hanging out. It's like, why don't a lot of American ghosts show up in England? Or vice versa? It's like, yeah. All right, so we have another from Jeff here, and we'll get to that real quickly. Okay, how often were Native American tales a take on European names like Wendigo and, I imagine, Banshees in the New World?
I think that happened quite a bit. There was a great deal of intermingling of folklore between the natives and the people that came over here. You had this again with a lot of different cultures. The French loup-garou, the French werewolf legend, ended up being sort of co-opted by the French Canadians and mixed with things like the skinwalker legend, I think the Metis people, up in Canada, I think I'm pronouncing that incorrectly, had werewolf legends and things like that. And I believe that all kind of got mixed up with one another. You have a lot of that ended up moving with French people down into the Louisiana area, got intermingled with African beliefs and things like that. So that certainly all got interwoven with one another. So I would say the answer is quite a bit. I think that a lot of these legends, luckily humans humans are not that different. No matter what culture you're from, none of us are really all that different from one another. And in different parts of the world, whether it's because we all began in one central place or because somehow we generated these beliefs independently, but they're natural to us, we end up coming up with really similar legends. So when these two cultures meet at some, distant point in the future, often it's really easy for these legends to get tangled up with one another. I think that's natural. I think it's nice to be aware of it so we don't end up co-opting somebody else's belief in a way that's inappropriate. But yes, the answer I'd say is pretty darn often. We have definitely taken the Wendigo legend and run with it. In fact, I've got a cat named Wendigo, who is very much a spirit of chaos. So.
Hmm. Well, we talked about European settlers coming over and bringing superstitions and folklore with them, which explains Mercy Brown, but along with the diseases that they came over, which wiped out thousands of indigenous people here. But that's another story. Mary Beth would like to know, what is your opinion on voodoo, if you have one?
So the various sort of African and sort of African descended magical systems ended up being usually again intermingled with Catholicism and Christian beliefs and things like that. I know that voodoo has a terrible reputation because of horror movies and sort of the fact that white Christian Europeans often distrust anything that isn't familiar to them. But it is a perfectly good religion. I don't know a lot of the depths of the religious belief system, but I know that as it came over here and merged with Christianity, that it became something that allowed a lot of the African enslaved people to keep at least a small piece of their culture alive. So what I think about it is that I think that it's a beautiful thing. There's still a lot of practitioners of things like voodoo and Santeria to this day, and every member of these cultures or these traditions that I've met have been wonderful and very, very open-minded people. I think that there's still, again, within sort of Christian and Christo-based belief systems, a lot of fear of these kind of things, but they are no different than any other religion from any other culture, and certainly not evil in any way. They may have some darker practices, but then again, if you look far enough into Christian belief, there are some, there are tales of sacrifice and tales of some dark things. You go far enough back in the Bible and things like that I think a lot of people like to gloss over. So I don't think any of these religions are any more dark or any more sinister than any other.
Yeah. As a side note, I went on a tour, a one of those haunted tours in Salem, and I got who I believe has been the greatest tour guide. Her name was Molly Stewart, and she was one of the, I don't know if it was the pioneer of the haunted tours in Salem, but she was a voodooist, and she was kind enough to give me some time on the tour to answer some of my silly questions about voodooism. And she explained it in length to me. And it is actually a very empathic religion where they don't believe in anything that you've seen in the movies, but that's true of all of us. Mary Beth also asks, who did the artwork for this? I absolutely love it. Well, we appreciate it. I'm not sure what artwork that you speak of, but we'll take credit for anything, Mary Beth, whether we deserve it or not. Of course, Erin Bush does a lot of it, and I do some, and George. So we all kind of contribute to that. And finally, before I bring George back in here, oh, I'm sorry. Let's get to Sandy. What? Hey, who's clicking these buttons here? Sandy wants to know, what's your favorite story in folklore? I'm
Oh
going to
my,
guess Sleepy Hollow, but I
that
don't know.
is such a difficult thing to answer because, like a lot of people, catch me on Tuesday and I'll have a different answer than I'll have on Wednesday. Um,
Right.
my favorite piece of perfectly American folklore, I think The Legend of Sleepy Hollow is right there. I mean, it's the quintessential great American ghost story. It was our first great American ghost story, and there is nothing that screams Halloween like the Headless Horseman. So yeah, I would say for a piece of like classically American folklore, definitely the Headless Horseman, legend is one of them. But folklore, I am a very mercurial creature, and my opinions change constantly. I have been immersed in werewolf folklore lately because of some of the projects that I'm working on, because I really basically have to drown myself in the folklore that I'm working with in order to keep myself focused. That's the beauty of having attention deficit disorder. And so right now, werewolves are my favorite creature in the world, and I do have to say that for most of my adult life, and even going back to when I was a teenager, if I could pick one mythical monster to be, it would certainly be a werewolf, because I think the idea of being able to, run free through the woods, drop your sort of human guise, and just be an animal again sounds like the best thing that could ever happen. So I would say that werewolves are way up there at the top of the list.
Well, you've also chosen to be an apex predator, so you have, you're not handicapping yourself. And finally,
People taste like chicken. That's what I'm told.
yeah, not so much a question as a comment. Caden Halloween Hayes, cool handle. Please end the night with a ghost story, Chris. Please and thank you. Well, we'll see what we have for time on that, but I'm sure he has a plethora of them. And that is pretty much going to do it for our questions. With that, I want to bring George back in here while I go refresh my drink, but we'll be back to say good night, y'all.
All right, thank you, Ken. I wouldn't have picked werewolf. You say, people are just kind of get rid of their human inhibitions, and I'm sitting there going, I've been to Key West, I've been to New Orleans, and they lose all of that without question. Um,
Well, it is also one of the only
Basically,
the only monster where you can be yourself most of the time and only be a part-time monster. So that part makes it convenient too.
give me your perspective, if you would, Chris, on cryptids. Are any of them in your research spiritual?
So the answer to that is a little bit tough, because although this may come as a surprise to many people, cryptids are not a big focus for me, because to me, cryptids generally tend to be physically real biological creatures that we just haven't discovered yet. Tends to be the sort of theory behind most cryptids. And because most of my research tends to lean towards creatures that are either mythic or folkloric, it only intersects with cryptids from time to time.
Such
I
as
do
the
hear
beast. The beast is one, right?
so the beast is, I think, yes, realistically you could call the beast a cryptid. That I think is
Yep.
100% correct. But of course, I did approach it from the folkloric angle of the werewolf connection to it. But yes, I think it's very fair to refer to the beast as a cryptid. Also, in the research for the book, I talked a lot about the dog man, stories, which is kind of, it's weird that it's come to be known as a dog man when every description of it still kind of keeps it, within werewolf territory. I think the one thing that makes it different from a werewolf is that most dogman stories do not feature a creature which changes shape, but rather which is in its natural form and just has the werewolf appearance to it. But I do constantly hear people saying things like, are they actually extra dimensional creatures of some kind? Are they coming here from another plane of existence and things like that? I'll say that I don't think I'm enough of an expert on that topic to make a really compelling argument for or against that idea. I do also, however, tend to say that a lot of these things are based on extremely arbitrary ideas. And so I think that sometimes, because people who are fascinated by the paranormal are quick to pick up on ideas like that, whether it's talking about cryptids being extra dimensional creatures, or talking about shadow people and what shadow people really are, is that I always find myself getting caught on saying, before we talk about what shadow people actually are, how do we differentiate that from, for instance, a ghost or anything else? Because I feel like people grab these buzzwords, these buzz phrases for things like that, orbs and vortexes and things like that, and without having a definition for what that thing actually is, they incorporate it into their lexicon. And I feel like that doesn't necessarily always serve the cause of sort of scientific investigation. It tends to become fandom, and that is something that it's, well, for me, it's a little bit difficult to reconcile. So usually when I get these questions, I just say, I don't consider myself an expert on it, but I haven't seen any evidence to back it up. So I think that The idea that there are creatures that still exist on this planet that we have not yet discovered, I think that is unquestionable. And in fact, we have things like the coelacanth, which was a fish. They discovered, I think, one of them off the coast of Africa in the 1920s or 30s or so, which was thought to be extinct for millions of years. And it turns out they are still alive and well. And since that time, maybe half a dozen of them have been caught. We've found plenty of creatures that we thought were long extinct, and we find new species all the time. So I think it's possible that some of these creatures do exist in actual biological, physical form. I think that it is jumping ahead to start assuming that they've come here from another dimension until we can verify that they exist or not.
I'm sure you've come across, uh, and it's an old book and an old movie, Tom Browning's Freaks.
Yes.
And it makes me wonder, such as the dog-faced boy, if a lot of this also, starts off with things that people see, do not understand, try to rationalize it, tell it in a story, and it becomes folklore, it becomes urban legend.
In fact, I think that's 100% correct. Although it's a little bit of a complicated question because you're right. There's a condition called hypertrichosis which causes people to become unnaturally hairy, and that is a condition that's been around for centuries and almost certainly contributed to some degree of werewolf mythology. So you have things like the dog-faced boy and stuff like that. You see pictures of these kids that were shown in circuses and everything that had all this body hair, but hypertrichosis is just a pretty well documented, and it's a very rare, but it still exists to this day, and it's just a genetic condition. So that's the one side of it. The other side of it is that often these questions get mixed up in the telling. Back in the 1980s,
Yes.
there was a professor by the name of David Dolphin, and David Dolphin believed that he had answered the question of vampire folklore and proven that it was actually just a medical condition, because he talked about congenital porphyria. Congenital porphyria can, number one, make people's skin very, very pale and cause them to actually burn when exposed to sunlight for even short periods of time. It causes your teeth to be deformed. It can make your teeth look fang-like. And interestingly enough, there's a pigment in human blood called hema, and if you ingested hema, it would actually relieve the symptoms of congenital porphyria. This appeared to be virtually proof that the vampire folklore actually was just based on a genetic condition. However, there is a deep flaw in this argument. The vampires that he's describing do not exist in folklore. The vampires he's describing come from fiction, Gothic fiction. Vampires in folklore never burned in the sunlight. Vampires in fiction couldn't stand the sunlight. Vampires in folklore were never pale and skinny. They were always bloated and ruddy from drinking fresh blood. And even the fangs is not something that's really common in folklore. So he took the wrong vampire and proved that it existed. It was unfortunately, it was an absolute embarrassment for the man, but it shows you that sometimes you've got to make sure your research is really solid, and that folkloric research can actually be the basis of scientific research if it's done properly.
That's an incredible explanation, and I think warrants more study out there, other than just yourself, to validate that. There are things medically, such as I was talking about with freaks. You'd have somebody who was born with a birth defect, no arms, no legs, and they're put on display as the snake boy. All these different things that come up there, and you're talking about folklore where people will spend things not looking at the possible foundations, and will jump to conclusions in it, and then it's up to you to kind of clean up the mess.
Well, the idea of using scientific fact as a basis for society is comparatively new in human history. So much of human history, it was religious beliefs, folklore and
Oh,
myth
sure.
that defined how we treated other people, and unfortunately led to some truly horrific things. I mean, we talk about things like the witch trials. We talk about, the way that somebody that was born with a cowl over their head, or born with teeth, or born with red hair, was often thought to either be, possessed by the devil, cursed, or sometimes thought to have magical powers of some kind. And so we treated people based on these ideas of folklore because we thought that the only reason that things existed in the real world was because of some kind of mythic or supernatural reason. And I'm not sure that we've really progressed as far as we like to think. You look
No.
around right now, and we still have a whole lot of superstition out there that, unfortunately, instead of it working hand in hand with science or complementing science, ends up replacing science, and that's unfortunate.
Right here.
You should check that thing for bed bugs.
We would need to save some time for a ghost story. So, Ken, if you want to come back in also, and we'll close it out with something that all of our viewers tonight can lose sleep over. So, Christopher, you got something in mind you want to bring our way?
So, instead of pulling out a ghost story, I actually have a great old folk tale that's certainly worth telling, and I'll share. And I mentioned it in brief earlier, but it's one that I only discovered a couple of years ago and has become a personal favorite of mine because it's based on a real historic figure. So back in the 1600s, the island of Nantucket was really struggling. It was remote enough that people were having a hard time making a living there, and they could see whales offshore all the time, but they didn't know how to whale. So they ended up hiring a man named Ichabod Paddock from the mainland, who was a notable whaler, to teach them how to whale. So Ichabod Paddock arrives on the island, and he turns out to be quite a rascal. He spends all his nights in the pub, hanging out with pretty girls, to the consternation of his wife, because of course he was married. But by day he would go out on his ship, and he was a very, very skilled whale hunter. But according to this particular legend, on one of their hunts, they were out there and they spotted a massive whale with black mottled skin that looked like it'd been scarred from 1,000 years. It looked like it was ancient and it was monstrous. And so they were like, "This thing is huge. We're going to get 150 barrels of oil out of this, if any." So they launched their boats. They went out to take this whale down. And Paddock took his harpoon. He reared back with his harpoon and he flung it with all of his might. And the harpoon struck the whale's hide and bounced off it like it was iron. Paddock was enraged. He'd never lost a whale in his entire career. So he picked up another harpoon, tried again, and once again, it just shattered when it touched the whale's hide. And the whale spun around, turned, looked at them as if to mock them, and then disappeared beneath the waves. Well, Paddock completely went nuts, became obsessed with this whale. They returned to Nantucket, and he ended up paying a blacksmith to make him 10 of those sharpest harpoons anyone had ever seen. So the next time they went out, they went hunting for this creature. The men told him that it was well known around this area, and it was known as Crookjaw because of its crooked mouth and all of its jagged teeth. So, around about midnight, once again, the black whale surfaces, and Ichabod Paddock and his men go out, and this time he's sure that these brand new harpoons are going to do the job. So he takes one of those harpoons and he flings it, and once again, it shatters like a child's toy when it hits the whale's hide. Well, Ichabod is insane. He's incensed with this. And so instead of picking up another harpoon, he clenches his knife in his teeth, drops his shirt, and leaps into the water after the whale. His men think he's insane, but he swims down beneath the water, and there in the distance he can see the silhouette of Crookjaw. So he starts swimming towards the whale, and the whale turns around and starts swimming straight towards him, opens its huge maw, and swallows him in a single gulp. Well, the men up top watched this whole thing happen, watched the whale disappear beneath the surface, and thought that's the end of the captain. But they weren't ready to give up on him yet. Paddock was a tough old brute, so they decided they'd wait a few hours. Meanwhile, Ichabod Paddock opens his eyes and finds himself in this cavern with a weird little flickering light. When he looks out, from this cavern, after he opens his eyes, he sees two people sitting at a table playing a game of poker. One of them is a beautiful woman with red hair the color of the sunset, and the other is very clearly the devil. The young woman lays down a final card from her hand, and the devil, enraged, knocks over his chair, stands up, says, "You cheated!" and disappears in a puff of brimstone. At this point, Paddock is a little bit freaked out, but he goes to approach this beautiful woman, and he says, "So what were you playing for?" And she turns and she looks and she goes, "Why, Ichabod Paddock, we were playing for your soul." At dawn the next morning, Ichabod Paddock rose to the surface of the ocean, climbed back aboard his ship, to the consternation of his men, and acted like nothing had happened. They returned to Nantucket, and a few weeks later, they went out whaling again. And they caught quite a few whales on that voyage. But at midnight, when the black whale surfaced, Ichabod Paddock said, "Time for my evening swim," dove back into the water, and disappeared until morning. He did this for weeks on end, and every time he returned from his strange overnight swims, he was paler and weaker, and the men began to realize that he was bewitched. So his first mate, Blake, decided that he had to do something about it. So the next time they were back in Nantucket, he wrote down a letter and delivered it to Ichabod Paddock's wife, who took one look at the letter and knew what she had to do. So the next time Ichabod Paddock got the ship ready to go out, his wife came running down the dock and had a long package wrapped in burlap and said, "This is for you. I had it made in Boston by the finest harpoon maker that lives." And it turned out that it was this glistening, beautiful harpoon like nothing he'd ever seen before. She said, "I thought you used it on Crookjaw, that whale you used to go on about." So off they went again, and the next time Crookjaw surfaced, his men said, "Captain, you've got to try out your new harpoon on Crookjaw. After all, you've been trying to kill that whale for months and haven't had any luck with it." Deciding he had to save some face because he knew that no harpoon could harm Crookjaw, he went out with the men and he picked up his harpoon, and with all his might, he flung it one more time, waiting for it to shatter when it hit Crookjaw's hide. But it didn't shatter this time. It penetrated. In fact, it went until not a single ounce of metal was left. But as it had flown through the air, Ichabod Paddock had noticed one thing. It glinted in the moonlight the way no iron harpoon ever could, and he realized his mistake. It was a silver harpoon that his wife had made, because that was the only thing that could kill a witch of the sea. Basically, the whale shrieked, opened its great jaws, fire shot up into the sky, and the whale vanished in a puff of brimstone. The only thing left behind was a patch of red seaweed that looked just like a fiery sunset or the hair of a witch. It's just a wonderful old folktale that I love. It's been around for about 300 years and based on a real whaler who lived in Nantucket. How he ended up with a folktale like that connected to him is beyond me. But I can tell you, a lot of the scandalous stories about him are true. He did end up being kicked off the island of Nantucket. And so that was the end of the whale Crookjaw.
That was scary.
Not scary, but it's a grand old tale. Sorry, I've put us over the mark a little bit here.
Fantastic. Wonderful. Oh, goodness gracious.
That's one hell of a story. And you're one hell of a storyteller. And those of you that are in the chat, those of you going to watch us post live also, this is a reason why you want to definitely check out the books, the stories written by this incredible gentleman, Christopher Rondina. And again, we've put the link at the bottom of the page. Make sure you guys look at all the ones that he has put out there, the ones that are coming up over the next 2 years. And man, I just love it every time you come back and see us, buddy.
Well, thanks for having me on, guys. It's always a pleasure.
Always. Thank you. Stay with us for just a second. Ken, anything to add before we close out? Oh, Town Hall tomorrow night, 8 p.m.?
Town Hall tomorrow night, 8 p.m. And next week, what we have planned is possibly the next variation of game show night.
Ooh.
But there'll be more on that coming up soon.
Very good. On behalf of Ken DeCosta, my name is George Lopez. Thanks you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. We'll see you next time. Until then, have a good rest of your week. Take care.
I see her rolling up, Uber black Cadillac, high heel boots and a sexy body full of tats. Baby's bad, oh baby's hella bad. After her there ain't no coming back. Wanna take a run at that. I think she's feeling me, turn it up a few degrees. My imagination of her body gets the best of me. Oh gosh, she's such a tease, big lips.